The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the suburban neighborhood of Maplewood. It was the kind of place where lawns were manicured to perfection, and the hum of lawnmowers blended with the chirping of birds. Among the neatly arranged homes stood the residence of Claire Thompson, a woman whose life was about to be upended by a revelation that would shatter her perception of trust and community. Claire had always been a diligent homeowner, attending HOA meetings, paying dues promptly, and adhering to every rule set forth by the association. She believed in the vision of a harmonious neighborhood where everyone contributed to the collective well-being. But that belief was about to be tested. One crisp autumn morning, as Claire sifted through a stack of mail, a particular envelope caught her eye. It was from the Maplewood Homeowners Association, but it wasn't the usual newsletter or event flyer. This one was different. It was a legal notice. Her heart skipped a beat as she tore it open. The letter informed her that the HOA had recently conducted a review of property records and discovered discrepancies concerning her land's deed. According to their findings, the deed to her property had been altered, and the HOA now claimed ownership of a portion of her land. The letter demanded immediate action to rectify the situation, threatening legal consequences if she failed to comply. Confusion and disbelief washed over Claire. How could this be? She had all her documents in order. She had inherited the property from her late father, and everything had been processed through the proper legal channels. She decided to investigate further. Her first stop was the county clerk's office, where she requested a copy of the deed. The clerk handed her a thick folder containing the document. As Claire scanned the pages, her eyes narrowed. There it was, her father's signature, dated and notarized, but beneath it in a different handwriting was another signature. The name read, Marcia Clay, the current president of the Maplewood HOA. A chill ran down Claire's spine. She knew Marcia had been the HOA president for several years, but she had never authorized any changes to her property. Determined to get to the bottom of this, Claire sought legal counsel. Attorney James Carter was a seasoned real estate lawyer with a reputation for handling complex property disputes. After reviewing the documents, he confirmed Claire's worst fears: the deed had been forged. Someone had used Marcia's position to manipulate official records and claim ownership of Claire's land. As the days passed, Claire's sense of betrayal deepened. The woman she had trusted to uphold the community's best interests had exploited her position for personal gain. But why? What was Marcia's motive? Determined to uncover the truth, Claire began to dig into Marcia's background. She discovered that Marcia had a history of financial instability and had recently faced mounting debts. Could this be the reason she resorted to such drastic measures? Claire knew she couldn't confront Marcia directly. She needed evidence. She enlisted the help of a private investigator to track Marcia's activities. What they uncovered was more shocking than Claire could have imagined. Marcia had been secretly selling portions of land from various properties within the neighborhood, forging deeds and pocketing the proceeds. The HOA, which was supposed to protect homeowners, had become a front for Marcia's illicit activities. With this newfound information, Claire took action. She filed a lawsuit against Marcia and the HOA, seeking to have the fraudulent deed nullified and to hold Marcia accountable for her actions. The legal battle was long and arduous, but Claire's determination never wavered. As the case progressed, more victims came forward, each with their own story of deceit and manipulation. The community that had once been united was now divided, with trust eroded and relationships strained. In the end, the court ruled in Claire's favor, declaring the forged deed invalid and ordering Marcia to pay restitution to the affected homeowners. Marcia was also sentenced to prison for her crimes. The victory was bittersweet. While justice had been served, the damage to the community was profound. Claire had lost more than just a piece of land. She had lost her faith in the very institution that was supposed to protect her. As she stood in her yard looking out over the neighborhood, Claire realized that the battle was not just about property. It was about integrity, trust, and the lengths to which some would go to exploit power. The scars left by Marcia's betrayal would take time to heal, but Claire was determined to rebuild, one step at a time. And so, the story of the forged deed became a cautionary tale in Maplewood, a reminder that even in the most idyllic settings, darkness can lurk beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. Part 2: The Web of Deceit. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Claire sat at the front, her hands clasped tightly together, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the past months pressed down on her, but she remained composed. This was the moment she had been fighting for. The judge's gavel struck the bench, breaking the silence. After careful consideration, he began, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Claire Thompson. The deed in question is hereby declared fraudulent and the defendant, Marcia Clay, is ordered to pay restitution to the affected homeowners. A wave of relief washed over Claire, but it was tempered by the realization that the battle was far from over. Marcia's actions had caused irreparable harm to the community, and the road to recovery would be long and challenging. In the weeks that followed, Claire worked tirelessly to help her neighbors reclaim their properties. She organized meetings, coordinated with legal experts, and provided support to those who had been affected. The process was painstaking, but slowly the community began to rebuild. However, not everyone was willing to forgive and forget. Some residents harbored deep resentment toward the HOA and its members, blaming them for allowing Marcia's actions to go unchecked for so long. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, threatening to tear the community apart once again. Claire knew that healing would require more than just legal action. It would require transparency, accountability, and a commitment to rebuilding trust. She pushed for reforms within the HOA, advocating for stricter oversight and more community involvement. It was a difficult sell, but over time her persistence paid off. As the months turned into years, Maplewood began to recover. The scars of the past remained, but they served as a constant reminder of the importance of vigilance and integrity. Claire had become a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for those who had been wronged. But as she looked out over the neighborhood, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was not entirely gone. The web of deceit that Marcia had woven was intricate, and there were still threads left untangled. Who else had been complicit? What other secrets lay hidden beneath the surface? Determined to uncover the full extent of the corruption, Claire continued her investigation. What she discovered sent shockwaves through the community. Marcia had not acted alone. She had been part of a larger network of individuals who had exploited their positions within various HOAs to commit fraud on a massive scale. The implications were staggering. With this new information, Claire took her findings to the authorities. A multi-agency task force was formed to investigate the sprawling conspiracy. The investigation uncovered a web of corruption that stretched across multiple neighborhoods, involving dozens of individuals and resulting in millions of dollars in stolen property. The fallout was swift and severe. Dozens of arrests were made, and many of those involved were convicted and sentenced to prison. The scandal rocked the real estate industry, prompting widespread reforms and increased scrutiny of HOA practices nationwide. For Claire, the journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but in the end, justice had been served and the community had been cleansed of the corruption that had tainted it. As she stood before her neighbors, now united and stronger than ever, Claire realized that the fight for what was right had been worth every sacrifice. The scars of the past remained, but they had been transformed into symbols of resilience and hope. And so, Maplewood emerged from the shadows of deceit into the light of a brighter future, forever changed by the courage of one woman who refused to back down. Part 3: The Echoes of Betrayal. The sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. Claire sat on her porch, a cup of tea in hand, reflecting on the tumultuous journey that had brought her here. The community had healed, but the echoes of betrayal lingered. Despite the legal victories and reforms, some residents still struggled to move past the events that had transpired. Trust, once broken, was not easily mended. Claire understood this all too well. One evening, as she walked through the neighborhood, she encountered an elderly woman sitting on a bench. The woman looked up and smiled faintly. "You did good, dear," she said softly, "but some wounds run deep." Claire nodded, her heart heavy. She had done what she could, but she knew that true healing required more than just legal action. It required compassion, understanding, and time. As the days turned into weeks, Claire continued to support her neighbors, offering a listening ear and a helping hand. Slowly, the community began to rebuild, not just in structure but in spirit. But as she worked to heal the wounds of the past, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. There were whispers, rumors of new schemes and plots emerging in the shadows. The battle against corruption was far from over. Determined to uncover the truth, Claire resumed her investigation. What she discovered sent chills down her spine. A new figure had emerged in the neighborhood, a charismatic individual who had quickly gained influence and trust among the residents. But Claire's instincts told her that this person was not what they seemed. Digging deeper, she uncovered a trail of deception and manipulation. The new figure was connected to individuals who had been involved in Marcia's network, and they were attempting to re-establish the fraudulent practices that had once plagued the community. With this information, Claire alerted the authorities. A new investigation was launched, and the community once again found itself at the center of a battle against corruption. This time, however, the residents were prepared. They had learned from the past and were determined not to let history repeat itself. As the investigation unfolded, more individuals were arrested and the remnants of the fraudulent network were dismantled. The community stood united, stronger than ever before. Claire had once again proven that the fight for justice was worth every sacrifice. The echoes of betrayal had been silenced, replaced by the harmonious sounds of a community that had reclaimed its integrity. But as she looked out over the neighborhood, Claire knew that vigilance was the price of freedom. The shadows of deceit may always linger, but as long as there were those willing to stand against it, the light of truth would prevail. Maplewood. The neighborhood had settled into a rhythm of calm, yet Claire knew that true peace was more fragile than it appeared. Every lawn neatly trimmed, every mailbox gleaming on the surface, the community looked perfect. But Claire had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. It was a quiet Sunday morning when a letter arrived at Claire's door. Unlike the first time, her heart didn't race with fear, it tightened with cautious curiosity. The envelope was plain, unsigned, with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper neatly typed, "Not everyone you trust is gone, some debts remain unpaid." Claire felt a chill crawl up her spine. Despite the previous investigations, the message suggested that the remnants of Marcia's network were still active, or at least someone wanted to ensure she remained on edge. Her mind raced through possibilities. Could it be a warning from a former accomplice, or was someone else testing the waters, seeking to exploit the community's renewed trust? Determined not to be intimidated, Claire contacted James Carter, her attorney, who had become more than a legal advisor. He was her ally and confidant in the fight against corruption. After reading the note, he frowned. "This isn't just a threat, it's a psychological tactic. Whoever sent this wants to destabilize you and the HOA." Claire's thoughts drifted to the community meetings she had organized over the past few years. Residents had become more vigilant, reporting suspicious activity, demanding transparency, and monitoring HOA decisions. The neighborhood had transformed into a fortress of accountability, but the letter proved that vigilance could never fully rest. Over the following weeks, Claire began discreetly reviewing recent HOA records, cross-checking property transfers, and consulting with local law enforcement. Patterns emerged. Transactions that seemed minor on the surface had subtle irregularities, small enough to slip through casual scrutiny, but enough to indicate that someone was probing for weaknesses. One evening, while reviewing documents late at night, Claire noticed something alarming. A new name appeared on a recently filed deed, someone she didn't recognize. Linked to a property at the edge of the neighborhood. The filing date was recent, the signature suspiciously neat, and the notary's stamp slightly misaligned. It mirrored the same sloppy precision Marcia had used years ago. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't coincidence. History was attempting to repeat itself. Claire decided she couldn't handle this alone. She reached out to several neighbors who had been vocal during the previous corruption battles. Together they formed a small watchdog group dedicated to scrutinizing all HOA actions and property changes. Their meetings were intense, filled with heated debates and detailed document reviews. Slowly the group began uncovering small anomalies, subtle manipulations of covenants, vague clauses in new HOA policies, and minor but suspicious land transfers. As the investigation deepened, the emotional toll became apparent. Claire often sat awake at night, haunted by memories of betrayal, wondering if the past horrors would resurface. She found herself questioning everyone she had once trusted, even some neighbors who had joined the watchdog group. The experience had sharpened her instincts but had also instilled a pervasive wariness. One crisp morning, a breakthrough arrived. A confidential tip from an anonymous source revealed that a former accomplice of Marcia's, someone who had evaded justice previously, was operating under an alias within Maplewood. This individual had quietly amassed influence, inserting themselves into HOA committees and subtly guiding decisions that benefited shadowy interests. Claire's worst fears were confirmed. The threat was real, and the danger was close to home. Armed with this information, Claire prepared to confront the issue directly. She coordinated with local law enforcement, ensuring surveillance and monitoring of suspect activities. The investigation culminated in a coordinated raid, uncovering forged documents, unregistered land transfers, and attempts to manipulate HOA elections. The network that had quietly infiltrated Maplewood was dismantled before it could take hold. In the aftermath, the community's sense of relief was palpable. Residents realized that vigilance and transparency were the true shields against corruption. Claire had not only defended her own property but had safeguarded the integrity of the entire neighborhood. Her journey had evolved from personal battle to community guardianship. Standing in her yard one evening, watching the sun set over Maplewood, Claire reflected on the journey. Betrayal had come in the guise of trust, greed had hidden behind official titles, and deception had thrived in silence. But through courage, persistence, and unity, she had turned the tide. The legacy she left behind was not merely legal victories, it was a culture of accountability and resilience, a community that would never again allow darkness to flourish unnoticed. Claire had learned that integrity was more than personal virtue, it was a responsibility to those around her, a torch to light the path for others. And as the evening breeze rustled the trees and laughter echoed from children playing in the streets, Claire understood a profound truth. Justice is not always immediate, trust is never guaranteed, and vigilance is eternal. Maplewood was safe for now, but its true strength lay in the community's willingness to stand together, guided by the lessons of the past, ready to face whatever shadows the future might bring. The aftermath of Marcia Clay's downfall had left Maplewood bruised but intact. On the surface, the neighborhood appeared peaceful, lawns neatly mowed, children playing in yards, neighbors exchanging polite greetings, but beneath the calm, an uneasy tension lingered. Claire Thompson had won the legal battle, reclaimed her land, and helped restore a measure of trust to her community, yet something deep inside her told her that the story was far from over. The shadows of betrayal, she realized, do not simply vanish once justice has been served. They linger, waiting for complacency, for a moment of lowered guard. The first sign came subtly, almost imperceptibly. Claire noticed an unusual email in her inbox, marked from the HOA board, referencing a new property filing in the neighborhood. The document seemed routine at first glance, but Claire's instincts tingled with suspicion. The filing was processed with unusual haste, the notarization slightly irregular and the signature awkwardly precise, almost mechanical. Something about it reminded her too much of Marcia's patterns. Claire knew that ignoring it could be dangerous. She immediately reached out to James Carter, her trusted attorney and strategist. "James, this isn't just coincidence," she said, her voice steady but tense. "The way this deed was processed, it has all the hallmarks of deliberate manipulation." James studied the documents closely. "You're right," he said. "Someone is testing the boundaries of the HOA's new oversight system. They're probing to see if anyone is paying attention and if they can exploit gaps in accountability." Claire's determination hardened. This was no longer about a single deed or one corrupt individual. The network of deceit had not been fully eradicated, it had only gone underground. Somewhere in Maplewood, someone or several people were quietly testing the limits of the system she and her neighbors had fought so hard to restore. She knew she couldn't confront this alone. Over the next few days, Claire discreetly reached out to neighbors she trusted, forming a small, covert task force. Together, they began meticulously examining all HOA records, property transfers, and committee decisions. Meetings were held in private homes late at night, with documents spread across kitchen tables and dining room floors, laptops open, phones buzzing with messages from concerned residents. The group worked like detectives, cross-referencing signatures, dates, and notarizations, hunting for patterns and anomalies that might indicate fraudulent activity. As the investigation deepened, the scope of the threat became chillingly clear. It wasn't a single person attempting to exploit Maplewood. It was a network, skilled, methodical, and patient. They were using aliases, shell corporations, and intermediaries to quietly influence decisions within the HOA, all while appearing legitimate on paper. Some residents, unknowingly caught in their schemes, had been complicit simply by following what seemed like routine HOA procedures. The deeper Claire dug, the more she realized the network's reach was wider than she had imagined. What had once seemed like isolated cases of forgery and deceit were actually fragments of a larger, more insidious pattern. The group had learned from Marcia's mistakes, adapting their methods to avoid detection. The threat was clever, shadowy, and very real. Claire began to experience a mix of frustration, fear, and determination. She spent long nights reviewing documents, cross-checking files, and mapping relationships between individuals involved in HOA operations. She became obsessed with details that most people would have dismissed: the the subtle wording of a property clause, the timing of committee approvals, the frequency of notarized filings. Every irregularity was a thread, and Claire was determined to follow each one to its source. During one particularly late night, Claire noticed a series of property transfers connected to a name she did not recognize. The transfers were small, almost trivial tiny parcels of land at the edges of larger properties, but they bore all the hallmarks of previous fraud: rapid approvals, notarized signatures slightly misaligned, and ambiguous descriptions that could easily be contested in court. Her pulse quickened. Someone was attempting to replicate Marcia's schemes, using minor manipulations to test the system's defenses. The discovery prompted Claire to escalate her investigation. She contacted law enforcement, sharing all the evidence her team had gathered. A multi-agency task force was assembled, including county investigators, forensic accountants, and cybercrime specialists. The authorities confirmed her fears. There was indeed a network of individuals seeking to reestablish control over property decisions in Maplewood. Meanwhile, Claire's personal life bore the strain of relentless vigilance. Sleep was scarce, her social interactions were limited, and moments of peace felt fleeting. She often walked the neighborhood late at night, scanning for irregularities, speaking quietly with neighbors, and quietly noting anything suspicious. Her determination was unwavering, but the psychological toll was evident. Fear had become a constant companion, but Claire refused to let it dominate her actions. Weeks of investigation led to a breakthrough. A former accomplice of Marcia's, previously unidentified in court proceedings, was located operating under a new identity within Maplewood. This individual had quietly infiltrated HOA committees, exerting subtle influence over policy decisions and property approvals. The realization was chilling. History, it seemed, was attempting to repeat itself under a new guise. Claire, James, and the task force coordinated a controlled approach to gathering further evidence. Surveillance, digital forensics, and discreet interviews with neighbors revealed a complex web of financial manipulation, forged documents, and attempts to sway committee votes without detection. Every lead was meticulously documented, every irregularity photographed, logged, and cross-checked. The emotional weight of the work was immense. Claire knew that one misstep could allow the network to regain momentum. She spent hours strategizing, sometimes doubting herself, but always returning to the same guiding principle: the safety and integrity of her community were paramount. Finally, after weeks of painstaking work, law enforcement executed a coordinated operation. Multiple arrests were made, documents seized, and fraudulent transactions halted before they could be finalized. Maplewood residents were shocked to learn that the shadowy network had attempted to reassert influence right under their noses. But the swift action and vigilance of Claire and her team ensured that no significant damage occurred. The neighborhood collectively exhaled a sigh of relief, but the psychological echoes of betrayal remained. Trust, Claire realized, could not be instantly restored. Even with the network dismantled, some residents remained wary, cautious, hesitant to fully engage in community activities. The wounds left by Marcia and her followers ran deep. Determined to heal the community, Claire initiated a series of educational programs and workshops for residents. These sessions focused on property rights, HOA ethics, document verification, and the importance of transparency. She emphasized vigilance without paranoia, collaboration without suspicion. Slowly, residents began to regain confidence, actively participating in HOA decisions and monitoring developments. One afternoon, while reviewing filings with her task force, Claire discovered another irregularity: a minor transaction that had slipped through due to an administrative oversight. Though small, it was a stark reminder that corruption could thrive in even the most innocuous circumstances. Claire's response was immediate. She corrected the issue, notified law enforcement, and used the incident as a teaching moment for residents, illustrating the importance of constant vigilance and collective oversight. Through months of effort, Maplewood began to rebuild its communal trust. Residents, once passive, became proactive participants in the HOA. Committees were reorganized, oversight mechanisms strengthened, and transparency became a core principle. The neighborhood's culture shifted, evolving into a model of accountability that prioritized both legal and ethical integrity. Claire herself had changed. The experience had left her sharper, more cautious, and fiercely protective of her community. She had learned the hard truth: even in places that appear idyllic, greed and deceit can take root. But she had also discovered the power of persistence, courage, and collective action. One person alone could uncover corruption, but a united community could defend itself against it indefinitely. Despite the restoration, Claire remained vigilant. Late at night, she would often walk the quiet streets of Maplewood, reflecting on how easily trust could be exploited, how subtle manipulations could threaten an entire neighborhood. The memory of Marcia Clay and the brief resurgence of the network was a constant reminder that the fight for integrity never truly ends. Yet there were moments of solace. She watched children play freely, neighbors chatting across fences, and homeowners tending their lawns with care. Each scene reinforced the purpose of her struggle, not just the preservation of property but the safeguarding of community, of shared values, and of a collective commitment to justice. The final piece of Claire's journey in part 3 came in the form of a community gathering. She stood before her neighbors, explaining the recent investigation, the arrests, and the lessons learned. Her voice carried both authority and empathy. "We have seen the consequences of deception," she said. "We have faced betrayal and tested our resilience. But together we have ensured that Maplewood remains a community built on trust, vigilance, and integrity. The fight is ongoing, but now we are prepared." Residents responded with quiet applause, nods of agreement, and heartfelt gratitude. The gathering symbolized more than just victory over the shadowy network. It represented the birth of a community culture that would endure beyond any single individual's efforts. Maplewood had been tested, and it had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. Yet even in triumph, Claire remained aware of the fragility of peace. Shadows could reappear, new threats could arise, and vigilance must never waver. As she walked back to her home that evening, the glow of streetlights reflecting on fallen autumn leaves, she understood that her role as guardian was ongoing. She had transformed from a victim of deception into a sentinel of integrity, ready to defend her community against whatever challenges the future might bring. Claire sat on her porch that night, reflecting on the journey so far. From the forged deed that had set everything in motion to Marcia's exposure to the covert network and its eventual dismantling, she had faced fear, betrayal, and the unknown. Yet she had also discovered strength, resilience, and the enduring power of collective action. Maplewood was safer now, not because danger had vanished, but because its residents had learned to stand guard together. Claire's vigilance, combined with the community's engagement, had created a living shield against corruption, a testament to the fact that integrity is not a static achievement but a constant commitment. As the night deepened, Claire felt a cautious optimism settle over her. The echoes of betrayal still lingered like distant shadows on the edge of memory, but they no longer defined the neighborhood. Maplewood had reclaimed its soul, guided by the courage of one woman who refused to allow deceit to go unchallenged. And in that quiet moment, as the stars glimmered over the familiar streets, Claire knew that the story was not merely about property or fraud, it was about legacy. Her fight had ensured that Maplewood would remain a place where trust is valued, vigilance is practiced, and integrity prevails. The battle for honesty and transparency was ongoing, but for the first time, Claire could feel that the neighborhood was prepared to meet it head-on. The early morning mist clung to the streets of Maplewood like a soft veil, hiding the familiar suburban tranquility beneath an air of tension. Claire Thompson walked slowly through the neighborhood, her mind still replaying the events of the past months. The community had faced betrayal, deceit, and near collapse, yet here it was, standing tall. But for Claire, standing still was never an option. The fight that had started with one forged deed had transformed into a mission to ensure that Maplewood would never again be prey to corruption. Even with the rogue network dismantled, the scars of past betrayal lingered in the hearts of the residents. Some houses had been quietly sold after the chaos, others remained empty as their owners refused to return after the trauma of manipulation and intimidation. The neighborhood looked calm, almost picturesque, yet beneath that surface, Claire could feel the remnants of fear and mistrust. She understood now that trust, once broken, required constant vigilance to restore. Claire's mornings were now a mix of investigation, planning, and community engagement. The HOA meetings had become something entirely different from the bureaucratic sessions they once were. They were forums for transparency, with residents demanding accountability and access to every piece of documentation. Claire had made it her mission to ensure that no deception, however subtle, could take root again. She had rebuilt the HOA from within, placing people she trusted, and people who had proven themselves during the Marcia ordeal, into leadership positions. But even as she worked tirelessly, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that the fight for integrity was far from over. Her gut had never been wrong before. The tip about the former accomplice operating under an alias had only scratched the surface. Claire had a suspicion that there were more threads of deception still tangled, more pieces of the puzzle hidden just out of reach. One late evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire sat at her desk reviewing recent property filings. It was quiet, too quiet. She noticed something unusual. Several HOA committee decisions had been quietly approved without proper resident review. The language in the documents was technical, but it contained subtle loopholes, just like the ones Marcia had exploited. Someone was testing the limits of the newly reformed system. Claire leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She called James Carter immediately, outlining her concerns. "It's subtle," she said, her voice low but urgent. But it feels familiar, the way the clauses are worded, the speed with which approvals happened. It's not just negligence. Someone is trying to push the boundaries without drawing attention. James paused. You're right, Claire. This is the work of someone familiar with the old network, someone who knows how to operate in the gray areas. You need to confront it head on. Over the next several weeks, Claire and her trusted neighbors formed a covert oversight team. They met in secret, reviewing every HOA proposal, every property transfer, every financial statement. They cross-checked signatures, notarizations, and legal filings. Slowly, a pattern emerged. It wasn't just one person this time, it was a small group, skilled at moving behind the scenes, using aliases, shell companies, and friendly intermediaries to quietly manipulate property decisions. Claire realized that Marcia's influence had never truly disappeared. It had splintered, scattered into fragments that were now attempting to reassemble themselves under new leadership. The realization was chilling. The very system she had rebuilt to prevent corruption was being tested again. Determined to strike decisively, Claire contacted the authorities once more, this time coordinating with a larger task force that included county investigators, forensic accountants, and cybercrime specialists. Every suspicious transaction, every ambiguous deed, was scrutinized with painstaking detail. The investigation revealed an even more intricate web of manipulation than Claire had anticipated. Several residents had unknowingly become intermediaries, signing documents and attending meetings without understanding their implications, inadvertently aiding the corrupt network. Claire took it upon herself to confront these residents, not with anger but with information. She hosted private meetings explaining how subtle deceit had played a role in past manipulations and how they could be vigilant in the future. Her approach was met with mixed reactions. Some were grateful, others defensive, but over time, her persistence began to cultivate a deeper understanding and commitment to transparency. One breakthrough came unexpectedly. A former accomplice of Marcia's, codenamed Lynn in the original investigations, was identified by a digital forensics expert. Lynn had returned to Maplewood under a new identity, working quietly to influence HOA decisions. The team coordinated a controlled confrontation with law enforcement, gathering undeniable evidence of fraudulent intent. The arrest was swift and the community was once again shaken, but this time prepared. In the days that followed, Claire organized a town hall, inviting every resident to witness the results of the investigation. She spoke with quiet authority, her voice steady but charged with emotion. We have faced deceit, betrayal, and the exploitation of trust, she said. But this neighborhood has survived because we refuse to look the other way. Integrity is not given, it is earned, defended, and protected. Today we reclaim Maplewood not just for ourselves but for the future. The reaction was powerful. Residents who had felt disillusioned were inspired to take active roles in community oversight. Volunteer committees were formed, transparency protocols were established, and a culture of accountability was deeply ingrained. The neighborhood, once fractured by deception, began to knit itself together again with a renewed sense of purpose. Despite the success, Claire knew the battle for integrity was never truly finished. She continued to monitor the neighborhood quietly, reviewing documents, attending HOA meetings, and ensuring that every transaction, every decision was subject to scrutiny. Maplewood had become a model of vigilance, a community that understood that the cost of complacency was too high. But the personal toll on Claire was profound. Years of legal battles, late nights, and constant vigilance had left her emotionally drained. The weight of responsibility was immense. She had lost moments of peace, relationships had strained under the pressure, and yet she persisted. The neighborhood's safety and integrity had become her mission and her legacy. One evening, as she walked through the streets of Maplewood, the lights from homes casting a warm glow, Claire paused to observe the children playing in the yards, neighbors chatting on porches, and friends walking their dogs. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The community was alive, thriving, and safe, not because it was perfect, but because its residents had learned the value of vigilance and the cost of integrity. Claire reflected on the lessons learned from Marcia's deception. Trust must be earned and continuously reinforced. Positions of power, no matter how small, can be abused, and the shadows of corruption will always exist, waiting for the slightest opportunity. But she also understood that courage, persistence, and collective action could shine light into the darkest corners. In the quiet of her home that night, Claire made a silent promise to herself. Maplewood would remain a community that demanded accountability, that celebrated transparency, and that never allowed fear or greed to dictate its future. She knew challenges would come, as they always did, but she also knew the strength of a united community. Years later, the neighborhood celebrated an annual Maplewood Integrity Day, established by Claire and her fellow residents. It became a tradition where new homeowners were educated about the importance of vigilance, HOA ethics, and community involvement. The story of Marcia's deception and the subsequent battles became a cautionary tale, a reminder that integrity required constant effort, but that it could prevail when courage and unity guided the way. Claire often watched the celebrations quietly, smiling as children ran through the streets, parents chatted, and neighbors came together in shared purpose. The scars of betrayal were still faintly visible, like shadows at the edges of memory, but they no longer dominated the neighborhood's narrative. Maplewood had transformed from a place of quiet vulnerability into a community resilient against deceit, united by shared experience and strengthened by lessons learned the hard way. In her final reflection, Claire understood that her journey had not been merely about property or legal victories. It had been about creating a legacy, a blueprint for integrity, a model for vigilance, and a testament to the power of individuals standing together against corruption. Maplewood's safety and prosperity were no longer reliant on a single leader, but on a collective commitment to truth and justice. And as the evening sun set behind the familiar rows of houses, Claire felt a profound sense of peace. The neighborhood was no longer just a place where she lived, it was a testament to resilience, a living monument to the idea that integrity, once fiercely defended, could endure through generations. The shadows might always linger at the edges, but in Maplewood, light and vigilance had won. Claire's journey had begun with a single forged deed, but it ended with the transformation of an entire community, a legacy of integrity that would guide Maplewood for decades to come. This part 4 is designed to be about 3,000 words in narrative, voiceover-ready style, concluding the story with both emotional and moral resolution while leaving subtle suspense about the ongoing need for vigilance. If you want, I can now combine all 4 parts into a single continuous script formatted for YouTube voiceover, with natural packing, mini hooks, and suspense beats for retention. This would be ready for recording directly. Do you want me to do that?